Hi, my name is Jeroen Leenarts. I work at Centraal Beheer, which is a brand of Achmea, and I will talk to you about our path to microframeworks with Tuist.io. First, a little bit about me. I've been a software developer since 2002. I've been doing iOS development since SDK 3, and I've worked on several small and big business-to-consumer and business-to-business apps, amongst them ING Banking, Neon, Achmea, and SurfNet and various other apps. I'm also available for hire on my brand AppForce One. So if you have a task that you need fixing for iOS development, just let me know, get in touch, and I'll see what I can do. I'm also the chairman of CocoaHeadsNL, so if you want to present at one of our meetups, just get in touch with me, Bart, Yolanda, or Marco, and we'll make sure to set you up for one of our future evenings so that you can actually present to our community. As I've already mentioned, I'm also employed by Achmea. So build times increase. Who owns what code? These are problems that you run into if you have an iOS project in Xcode that is getting bigger and bigger. I don't know what build times your guys are dealing with, but at Centraal Beheer, at some point it was like 5 minutes, and it was really becoming a problem for our unit testing workflow. And also it's just a pain in the where to actually just compile your project from scratch, that it'll take 5 minutes, and what do you do with that time? Also, because of the structure of our code, everything was in one big target, it gets harder and harder to keep that well structured and to have a good idea of who owns what code and who's mainly responsible for what code. Of course, everybody is responsible for all the code, but people do tend to have their own focus areas that are based on the team that you're in. So we've looked at some different options to deal with the project complexity. We've looked at Bug, Bazel, Tuist, and manual. The last option is actually what we started with. We started generating manual frameworks ourselves and just try and see what actually it can bring to us. And we've noticed that it does bring a lot of benefits, but it's hard work manually creating frameworks in Xcode and making sure that it keeps working, and it's very error prone, and it's something that we didn't want to keep on doing into the future. I can go into a lot of details about Bug and Bazel, but suffice to say that Bug and Bazel add a lot of complexity to your project with tooling that is very unfamiliar to iOS developers. And when we started looking at Tuist, it felt way more at home and more convenient, and also much better to understand if you are coming from an iOS or Xcode-based development workflow as a background. So Tuist, we've went with Tuist. We started experimenting, and since 2 weeks, I think, right now, we're actually transferred our entire project from our old approach, which was manual dependency management with Cocoapods, to using Tuist. So what is Tuist? Tuist is a command line tool that aims to facilitate the generation, maintenance, and interaction with Xcode projects. Tuist itself is written in Swift, but also the manifests that you have to maintain for Tuist are actually also written in Swift. I think it's just best to show you what it is about. So open my terminal. Let's see, what should I show first? Let's just show our project first. So what I do now is run our command line tool Tuist. I run Tuist edit, and what it actually does, it inspects my folder structure, and it generates an Xcode project only containing the manifest files of our project. So we have a workspace, several projects, and sort of like a base folder with several manual files you can add there that allows you to configure and create some sort of convenience classes that help you generate your project structure. So in our workspace, we define what projects we actually have. And in one of our projects, let's pick a convenient one, we actually define that we have a project. It is a framework. It's named Even Appen Common. It's targeted at iOS. It has a resources folder, and it has one single dependency. Very easy. Let's look at another. Let's look at the core. It's a bit more complicated. Still very good to get a grip on. It's basically the same stuff. It's a framework. It has a name. It targets iOS. It has some resources. And then it has a number of dependencies: common, domain, network, assembly, and UI. I'm mentioning resources here, but what about my source code? Well, let's go into a little bit of detail there. This is into our project templates, which are located here. And here you can actually see that the framework function that we've seen earlier, it's a bit more involved, and it has a number of default parameters. For example, if you look at, where is it? The resource that we pass in, that's actually an empty array. But we actually, if we call it, we add a resources declaration, and then the resources are available. The sources, they're actually, if you look at the framework, it links through to project, and then in project we have a number of targets, and then we have sources here. There's something interesting going on here. So let's just go into Xcode with our project and see how this stuff actually maps onto each other, because I've just given a quick view into the details of Tuist, but now just let's get an idea of how this looks into our project. Takes a while to generate, approximately 10 or 12 seconds. And then once it's done, we have a project. There we are. We have a project here, so let's see. This is not too bad. Let's look at the initial example that we looked at, the common one. So you again see projects and common. And well, we have sources, we have resources, we have tests actually. And this project actually has targets. You see a target Even Common, a target Even Appen Common tests. Let's look into what we have here. So if you look at Even Appen Common, you see it's a framework. It's called Even Appen Common. We link through. Then we see the framework links to a function project. This project has 1, 2 targets. It had more targets if it's an app. And then what you see here is that the name of the test target, which is defined here, product unit test, is actually the name of the project with tests appended. So if we pass in an argument with the name string, Even Appen Common, and product is called Even Appen, and the test targets is called Even Appen tests, which is right what we see here. As you notice, my Xcode is happily indexing our source code, and considering the amount of CPU that we're using, you can actually get a good idea of how much code our project is. Well, maybe just I should show that. This is only the source code that we authored ourselves. So this is no third-party dependencies, nothing Cocoapods, no Swift packages. As you can see, it's a lot of files. And we're waiting for a bit because Xcode is eating all my CPU actually. There we go. So it's a project with close to 160,000 lines of Swift code and 21,500 lines of Objective-C code, and then some other smaller bits and pieces and a bunch of XML, which is not very important because of course the XML, that's the zip files and the storyboards and stuff like that. So all in all, it's a reasonably sized project. So we have two targets, common and tests, which is as declared here. And this is your main target, and this is your tests target. So what you see actually is with Tuist, you actually generate a number of projects. You declare them in Swift, and they actually result in something that is in your Xcode navigator. So what does this mean about the Xcode projects themselves? Do you have to add them to source control or not? Well, we chose not to add them to source control because we generate them fresh each and every time. So now I've shown a few basics, and now we can go into a bit more details. So back to my slides. What I wanted to show, this is the situation that we had before we switched to using Tuist. So you can imagine all those lines of code, they are somewhere in this graph, and basically most of them were in this little blue box at the top here. So it's not really to scale the blue box. It's actually, compared to the other stuff, it's way bigger. And that's also one of the things that we wanted to fix. So once we were done with our initial migration from Even Appen to Tuist, this is the graph that we ended up with. So you might imagine, let's look at the first one. Why is this worse than this? Well, basically what you get here is that related code is now in close proximity to each other, and it's very explicit where you need to look into your source tree. So for instance, if you want to look at networking related code, we have our networking project, and we have a number of network jobs and some convenience deserialization helpers, and mainly the gist of our network. We also use an API gateway type layer, which is called SAP Mobile Platform, and to actually unlock everything that's in there, we have a lot of code to actually deal with the complexities of that as well, which is this. So basically what this means from the network perspective, we have to use our API gateway, but all the internal complexities related to that, they are in here, and we're only talking to an API that is publicly exposed to the rest of the world by this S&P framework at the bottom here. So I say exposed, because we are working with frameworks, there is one very convenient feature of Objective-C that is now actually meaningful, and that is actually, if you look at something innocent like a formatter, if I would remove this public statement, then this function would only be visible within this framework, so it would not be exposed outside of the Even Appen common framework. So that means that if you write like convenience or helper extensions or functions, you can just create those. You don't want to bother the rest of your teams with it, so you don't declare it public. Everybody within your framework can actually use it, but nobody else is actually bothered by it, so you don't get any namespace pollution, or that you actually by accident override somebody else's convenience function because you happen to just import their stuff on top of your implementation. So to go into a lot of to continue on with Tuist, what I've already showed, you can now declaratively create your project. Of course, Tuist has a lot of documentation on what is actually available. It's actually quite good documentation to just read through and just come to grips with what is there. And what they actually provide on this project description, this is the main thing that you can split with your description helpers, is that you can see here a project has targets, a target has schemes, and everything just bolts and fits together in a way that actually an Xcode project is laid out as well. And that's actually very interesting to see, because once you start working with Tuist and actually understand the model that Tuist is providing to you as a software developer, you actually notice, hey, but this is of course, very similar to what Xcode does, and then you notice that it's a somewhat of an abstraction to what Xcode does, and you get a better understanding of what's actually going on within Xcode as well. Of course, there's some other cool tricks as well. You can focus on a specific area. So I can actually, if I work in my project, I can actually say, well, I just want to work on the common framework, which is this one. I want to unit test it, and I'm running my unit test now. It doesn't have a lot of unit tests, I think, this one, not yet. And you've seen it actually compile quite quickly. And now it's running the tests. Basically, waiting for the simulator to start is something that we're all a bit too used to. And the unit test is already finished. So what you gain with this is that you can only like zoom into the area that you want to test, and it's actually very quickly to actually compile, launch, and test that. So you get back that really short feedback loop that you want to have when you're unit testing, and that's one of the biggest benefits that we're getting from Tuist at the moment. Also, it integrates well with our Azure pipeline environment. So just to give you a little bit of an insight into that, we have our pipeline definitions. A lot of stuff going on here, but basically at the start of our pipeline, what we need to do is just make sure that we run our Tuist generate script, and then our projects are generated, and then everything is as it used to be. So you have a project and you can just continue doing your build on your infrastructure. So basically, I've given you a brief insight into what Tuist can offer. I imagine there are a lot of questions, and I don't know what the specific questions will be, but I'd say just ask away, and I've actually taken a little bit less time on my presentation, so I have more time to actually answer my questions. Thank you. Okay, so there was a question by Axel, I think, about how do you know what your main target is? Well, that's something that you know yourself. In our case, it's just Even Appen. You can recognize that in your Tuist project file by that being the project that has no targets pointing towards it. And people hear typing, it seems. And so yeah, it's something that you just have to know, Axel. Other questions? Well, there was a good tip by Dasdom actually. If you open the target selector, then you can actually by typing select your target, so it's easier to pick your targets. Also, something that let's see, that John Reed, that he mentioned that is that if you use Tuist, you have small projects, and indeed, if you look at the smaller projects, your compile times, they are a lot less than if you compile and test your entire project. And that's one of the biggest advantages of using Tuist in my mind, because you can just really shorten the feedback loop that you're dealing with when you run your compile and test loop. Any other questions? With Vapor, Xcode defaults to some vague library. Okay, I don't know Vapor that well, but I believe you, Axel. Let's see if there's any questions in Slack. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions in Slack. Any questions in YouTube remaining? Let's scroll down. Oh yes, John, that's actually included in the package. You just run Tuist space graph, and you've seen the images in my presentation. Those were actually generated with Tuist, and it uses a dot format internally. So you can actually output it as a point dot file, so that's Graphis, or you can output it directly to PNG so that you can immediately include it in your documentation or share with your team. Can Tuist convert your projects to their templates? Well, that's a question by Marius. Can Tuist convert your project to their templates? That's one of the biggest hurdles, actually, because you have to take the pain of actually converting your entire project to use Tuist, because it's a different format, and you have to take your time to actually do it. What we did at Achmea is actually we wrote a makefile that moves all the files into the correct positions, and then you have to, of course, do a lot of small tweaks to your code base to actually make it work. And we stored those in a Git batch file, so that every time we updated our development branch, we could actually run those two things fresh and see where we were at with the Tuist migration. So then the rest of the team could keep on working with what they were doing. And that actually allowed us to keep working and actually do the migration simultaneously. And once we were ready, we ran the scripts, committed everything, and then just hope for the best, really. And it worked out. I'll ramp up. A question by John Nyquist. What was your team's ramp-up time to start using Tuist? The technical migration, I worked on that for 6 weeks on and off. So it was like an off-time project for me. So I spent like over a period of 6 weeks, I spent like maybe 8 hours each week. And then once we migrated, the entire team really, they just picked it up in a matter of like 1 hour of hands-on training with 8 people. Marius asks if you need to start from scratch, even for an existing project. Well, basically, you just drop your Xcode projects and your Workspace files, and you make a new project structure. So yes, project-wise, you start from scratch, but of course, you hang on to your source files and your resources. Any other questions? Okay, I'm reading. I saw that you have dependencies integrated with pods and Swift Package Manager. That seems great. Any limitations on that or troubles with mixing dependencies? Can you also specify manual dependencies or cartridge? That's a question by Plamen. I hope I pronounced it correct. Plamen Andre. He has a question on dependency management within Tuist. Yes, within Tuist you can use Cocoapods, cartridge packages. You can use Swift Package Manager. You can use just your regular old .a file with headers, or just if you have some sort of dynamic or static framework lying around, you can also include that. One thing that you have to acknowledge is that Tuist at the moment doesn't have full support for Cocoapods. It's not a problem, but what it means is that you basically have to make sure that you generate everything, your entire project structure with Tuist, which is based on Swift packages, cartridge, and everything else. And then that structure, you actually, as an afterthought, you run Cocoapods on that. So you have to have intimate knowledge of your targets, which is, of course, that's something you have. And then it just works out of the box. And I do know that the dependencies, we don't have dependencies within Swift Package Manager that depend on anything in another package manager. So that's, of course, something, if you have an interdependency between dependencies, they, of course, due to the nature of the tools that you're using, the dependencies of your dependency would also be automatically included already by the by the package manager that you're already using. I don't even know what I said right now, but I hope it makes sense. So, and Plamen, if you have any other questions on that, or if you want me to showcase some stuff or talk through you some things with that, just ping me on our CocoaHeadsNL Slack, and I'll see if I can help you there. And Axel has a question based. Well, Axel is enjoying his love for Vapor, it seems. Any other questions? Now, Axel is wondering actually if Tuist is doing it better than Vapor. I don't know. I don't have any experience with Vapor Xcode. This is so weird. I'm seeing myself delayed with like 30 seconds. Okay, there's no more questions. People on my screen are waving at me to put an end to this. And I hope you enjoyed my talk. It was kind of a new experience for me to actually do something pre-recorded. I work way better in person when I'm presenting, but I hope my talk made sense. And if there's any questions that you have, then just ping me on Slack or on Twitter or whatever. You can reach me. And also make sure to join our next CocoaHeadsNL meetup. Thank you very much.